Good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you who joined the webinar already, and I can see the attendee count climb rapidly. I can see many more people are joining. Let us get started. The webinar today is Introduction to LeanNow, an accelerated approach to implementing Lean, and the main speaker for the webinar today is Randall Benson. The webinar is brought to you by SwiftKanban from Digitech, and I'll be giving you introductions very shortly. Let's get started with some housekeeping items. First of all, get started with some introductions and a very quick word from the sponsors, SwiftKanban Digitech, a short introduction, and then I'll hand over the presentation to Randall for his overview on LeanNow, and then finally we'll open it up to a good Q&A session. Hopefully, all of you have some interesting issues to talk about, and we'll take as many of your questions as possible. So with that, let me get started. Before I get started again, just so you know, we'll take the questions via the Q&A box that you see on the bottom right side of your screens. You can go ahead and enter a question anytime you like, and we will take them up at the end in the Q&A session. Just so you know, the webinar is being recorded, and we will share the slides and the recording after the webinar is completed. So with that, let me get into the introductions right away. Randall Benson is CEO of Benson Consulting. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm co-founder and senior vice president product for Digitech, which is the maker of SwiftKanban. Randall is a self-confessed lean heretic, and he'll talk a little bit more about that. He's a lean consultant, a coach, and trainer, and he's been in the industry for many years. He's also the author of a very powerful book called The Quest Effect, a very interesting book for organizational transformation. He's worked with a variety of industries, including manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, government, as well as non-profit, high-tech, travel and hospitality, and many others. And he's based out of the Seattle area. Before I hand over the microphone to him, I will just give you a quick overview of Digitech and SwiftKanban. Digitech is a pioneer in web-based collaborative applications and products, and our primary goal has been to help geographically distributed teams collaborate better for delivering products and services better to their customers. We are headquartered in Cupertino, California, and we have over 300,000 users of our products across the globe. Our products cover Lean Kanban, Agile application lifecycle management, or Agile ALM, and project portfolio management. And SwiftKanban is our flagship Lean Kanban product. SwiftKanban has been in the market for more than a couple of years now, and it has been successful in a variety of applications, helping you visually manage any aspect of your business, whether it's software development or marketing or HR or construction or any such general business function. And we use SwiftKanban internally for all of our product development, marketing, and other operations. Or you could use visual Kanban product for personal Kanban, and for example, planning your Thanksgiving party, something that some of us have done and has proved to be quite popular and interesting for a lot of people to use. And overall, we provide a pretty full Lean, Agile, ALM stack, which includes all of the items that I mentioned earlier: project portfolio management, software development, IT, and DevOps support. Underlying that is a strong process modeling capability that allows you to model sophisticated as well as simple processes. We have a very strong integration capability that allows you to integrate with a variety of tools that you might have in-house, and all of that is visualized through multiple capabilities, including Kanban board, dashboards, and other collaboration capabilities, and such as workflow, etc. We have a very wide variety of companies that follow and use Digitech products, including SwiftKanban, and this is just a very small list of some of our customers that use our products, and you'll see some very recognized and respectable names. So with that, let me hand over the presentation over to Randall. Randall, hopefully you're up and running and you can hear me. And Randall, you might have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. Randall, you are on, and we can see your slides. So I guess you can get started with the. I can hear you clicking away, so I know that you're there.
Great. I'm just. Can you hear me now, or am I still muted?
No, you're fine. We can hear you.
Oh, great. All right. I was looking for the unmute button while you folks were all waiting. Okay, let me start my slides and be ready to go. Pardon me for the delay, and I want to express how delighted I am to be with you folks today and talk about LeanNow, a alternate way to think about implementing and operating in a lean environment. Today I'd like to talk about a few ideas that I think are somewhat heretical in the lean industry, but these are the ideas that allowed us to come up with a different approach to using lean, particularly in non-manufacturing industries. So what I've observed is there's been little change in our approach to lean over the last 30, 40, 50 years since the manufacturing model was developed at Toyota, which means that for those of us who don't work in manufacturing, which is about 92% of the organizations in the United States, we've been doing lean backwards because we've been following the manufacturing model, which really doesn't apply that well in non-manufacturing organizations. When I started my life in lean many years ago, we were taught that the lean precepts work everywhere in service and government and healthcare. They should work just the same way they do in the factory. But I've come to believe that that's actually not true, and that there's a significant difference between manufacturing and non-manufacturing environments, and that we can take advantage of those differences to create a different approach to lean. If we follow the traditional manufacturing approach to lean into non-manufacturing industries, what we'll find is that the cost of doing this lean kind of in the backwards upside down mode, which is what happens, is that the cost is really quite staggering. And so the new approach we wanted to make very inexpensive and very rapid to be able to implement compared to the traditional manufacturing model. To do that, it required some new technologies to allow us to kind of change the game and change our approach to lean implementation. And that's where my relationship with Digite and SwiftKanban originated. If we can take a different approach, think of this as an upside down approach compared to manufacturing. This allows us to rethink some of the lean precepts that we've used for the last 30 years and take a slightly different approach in non-manufacturing environments. That allows us to go really from not doing lean at all to being able to do lean in 30 days or less in most non-manufacturing environments. And it only takes 5 fairly straightforward steps compared to a multitude of steps in infrastructure that were required in the manufacturing model. So that's basically what I'd like to address today during this webinar. So what I found is that the generation that's leading businesses today is much different than business was conducted 30, 40, 50 years ago, when we had a lot more manufacturing in our industrial base. As I mentioned today, more than 90% of organizations and more than 90% of employees work in non-manufacturing environments. Even in manufacturing companies, the vast majority of business processes in manufacturing companies are also away from the shop floor and could benefit from applications of a different approach. So the vast majority of organizations can become lean very quickly, and this overview, I hope, will explain how we could do that and how we could approach it. If you haven't started lean yet, this is an opportunity to consider a way to do lean in 30 days or less. If you're already implementing lean, I think this will give you some new ideas about how you could approach your implementation and maybe reduce some of the time and cost and disruption that your lean implementation would take. So I'd like to just address kind of the definition of lean for a minute, because this the whole new approach really pivots on what we mean by lean and how we use the definition. The definition I want to use today is creating and sustaining an uninterrupted flow of customer value through the value streams in our organizations. And we can do this by involving everybody in the elimination of any waste that impedes flow. And ultimately, we can do this by eliminating waste in every form. Now, this definition is different than the traditional definition of lean, because the traditional definition sounds something like involving everybody in the organization in the elimination of waste in every form. And what that traditional definition does is causes kind of a misdirection toward waste and toward a broad-based attack on waste in our organizations. And it turns out that that approach in non-manufacturing environments in particular is actually disruptive. And if we can go for flow first, and by building that and sustaining that flow of customer value, we can then use that flow to address waste in other parts of lean principles. So in my view, you're doing lean when you're managing daily operation with lean principles and you're improving that process continuously. So by that definition, I would consider an organization that's doing lots of Kaizen events and doing lots of waste reduction not to be actually doing lean yet. It's more like they're preparing to do lean. So I don't consider waste reduction per se as the definition of doing lean, but really it's managing daily operations with lean principles that generates the bottom line results for organizations. I think I have that in there twice, pardon me. Non-manufacturing, so really I'm addressing people in non-manufacturing organizations, and that includes services, high-tech organizations, healthcare, government, nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, and the like. And so it's about the process really of those organizations learning how to use lean effectively to generate the same kinds of results that we've seen in manufacturing organizations in the past. The problem is that if we apply the traditional manufacturing approach to lean in non-manufacturing organizations, we'll find that it takes months and even years to implement lean. Many organizations spend many tens of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars in consulting fees in order to get to the point where they're managing even their first operations with lean principles. It involves endless waste removal if people buy into the definition of, like we did in manufacturing, of beginning with broad-based waste reduction. Drains the resources of the organization because these processes, these implementations can last for months and years. It's disruptive and creates fatigue in the organization because so many people in the organization in the traditional approach are actually involved at one time in the implementation. So it drains resources, causes organizational fatigue. And even with that, it tends to produce disappointing results in the short run because waste reduction is kind of a one-off improvement. But as a result of not operating on a daily basis with lean principles, we're not actually driving operational results to the bottom line until we get way downstream in the implementation. That results in sagging support in the organization for the lean initiatives themselves. As other strategic opportunities appear to the organization over a year or two, if it takes that long to implement, it's hard to keep people in the organization focused on the lean implementation itself. And I think one of the real shames is that because of this cost and kind of difficulty of implementing lean using the traditional model, many non-manufacturing organizations view themselves as really too small to consider lean in their businesses or their organizations. And I think that with a different approach, almost any organization, regardless of size, could be using lean in their organizations. So what I'd like to do today is talk about how we might overcome these problems and take a different approach to lean going forward. So to reiterate, I believe that we're limited by our factory floor heritage. I started my career in lean actually in Japan working with manufacturing companies and saw lean principles being used very effectively to improve manufacturing operations. So I'm fairly familiar with manufacturing operations. I've done a lot of consulting over the years with manufacturing companies. But I think that we bought into the idea that lean is the same everywhere, and what works on the factory floor should work just as well in other organizations. The basic thought was, well, a process is a process, and lean's about improving processes, so why wouldn't it apply the same everywhere? And I have to say I bought into that for many years, but I don't believe it anymore. I think now we're limited by that factory floor heritage, and actually we've kind of become victims of the tyranny of the orthodoxy of lean, and we're kind of expected to accept the lean manufacturing model without question, even if we're not working in manufacturing organizations. The other side of it, which I referred to a moment ago, was that because of the definition of lean, we tend to get stuck in these endless loops of Kaizen events and other forms of waste reduction. And we begin our process by identifying and attempting to remove waste. The problem is that there's so much waste in organizations, and waste is everywhere in organizations, that we can simply be in this waste reduction loop forever and never get to the other parts of lean that actually drive more results to the bottom line. So we think we're doing lean by doing these waste reduction events, but in fact, they're distracting us from creating a flow of value to our customers and managing the flow of value, which is really the ultimate aim of lean in my mind. So orthodox lean front loads implementation of lean and development of lean capability with eliminating waste, reorganizing the workplace, co-locating, and setting up cellular approaches to delivering value. And then when those things are all set up, finally we get to the point where we can manage with flow. Now that's necessary in a manufacturing organization, I believe, because there's so much so many physical impediments to flow that those have to be eliminated. So we have to remove tons of work in process that's actually blocking flow and blocking our visibility of flow. We need to move large machines into out of machine centers into manufacturing cells and relocate people in those manufacturing cells. Make the work visible, so that means changing the physical layout of the factory so we can see the flow. So there's a physicalness to manufacturing that doesn't really exist as much in non-manufacturing organizations, and yet we still follow the same principles as if we were working on a shop floor when we were working in an office or other non-manufacturing environment. I'd like to share one story about Ted, who I met a few years ago. He was the lean leader for a healthcare organization in California. They had 5 or 6 hospitals, as I recall. When I met him, Ted was 18 months into his lean implementation. He'd spent over $1.5 million on consulting, and he had a list of this laundry list of activities he was doing to prepare and implement lean. So here's on the slide, you can see a few of the things that he was doing. Value stream mapping, 5S workplace reorganization, lots of project management. He had over 200 people in his organization on lean teams. He had a large lean project office with full-time project people working in his office, lots of planning and assessment, etc. And yet, after 18 months, he wasn't running one single healthcare delivery process using lean principles. He was simply spending time getting ready to implement lean sometime in the future. He said that he had at least a year to go and maybe another $500,000 to $1 million in additional consulting fees before he was going to be operating entire departments with lean principles. And I think this is the problem is that Ted followed the manufacturing model, implemented it by the book, and yet that created this huge front load of activities that really kept him from creating and managing flow in his organization. I think the desired state that I'd like to see is where non-manufacturing organizations can implement lean very rapidly at very low cost and get results within 60 days that go to the bottom line so that they can maintain support within the organization for the lean initiative. It should be very easy to do and very smooth instead of this burdensome front-loaded weight on the organization to implement Lean. Otherwise, it should be a joy to implement rather than a pain to implement. I think that you should be able to sustain support because the implementation is so fast. It doesn't take months and years of support to get this done. Once results are dropping to the bottom line in the first rounds, it'll be much easier to create support for additional value streams after that. We can use the value streams themselves to do targeted waste removal of high leverage waste instead of doing broad-based attacks on waste throughout the organization. And we can open this up to small organizations who before didn't have access or didn't believe they could do Lean because of the cost and burdensome nature of the implementation. So I think this is possible, and this is what the situation should be for over 90% of the organizations in the United States. And the 8 or 10% that are manufacturing organizations probably still need to use the traditional approach, but they're in the small minority of organizations who could be considering Lean in the country. So I think we can actually go from not doing Lean from 0 point to being Lean in 30 days or less, and we can see benefits dropping to the bottom line in 60 days from the time that we begin implementation. If we're going to do this, it requires a different approach, and it requires an approach that's purpose-built for non-manufacturing organizations instead of adapting and adjusting the traditional manufacturing model. And to do that, we have to use new technologies that weren't available to organizations 30, 40, 50 years ago. So a lot's changed, and part of the approach we're taking is borrowing some technology from other industries and repurposing it in the manufacturing world, in the non-manufacturing world. So the new approach that we've been using for the last few years is to do flow first, right away. So instead of removing all the barriers to physical flow that we see in a factory, in non-manufacturing organizations, typically we don't have those same physical barriers, so we can set up flow quite rapidly. And then once we have flow set up, we can use the flow, we can manage that flow with Lean tools and Lean principles right away and change the way that supervisors and managers work on a daily basis to incorporate Lean principles. And then we can use that flow, as I mentioned, to target the waste, and upon removing that waste, we can streamline the flow and create immediate end-user benefits as well as bottom-line results for ourselves. So just to use the flow to target waste, the question really is, what are the rate-limiting factors that are affecting our ability to deliver value through the flow that we have? And those rate-limiting factors, those bottlenecks, if you like, are the places where we should be attacking waste. So we don't have to attack waste at this point on a broad-based approach. We can attack waste directly by using the flow itself. So that's the benefit of implementing flow rapidly, is that we can then use the flow itself as a tool that is far, far superior to using value stream maps in the traditional model to go after waste. So the new model, the vision that we had was to do flow first, and then use flow to eliminate waste, use flow to identify where we need to reorganize the workplace, and use flow instead of co-locating, use flow to cross-coordinate the organization so that we don't have to co-locate, that we can run virtual organizations and still be using Lean flow in non-manufacturing environments. The traditional model can be represented by this pyramid, which I borrowed from a healthcare organization and modified a little bit. This is a non-manufacturing organization's idea of how they should approach Lean, and you notice that flow is the ultimate top of the pyramid. So they want to do, they are doing everything else in this pyramid first before they actually get to the point of doing flow. So first, there's this kind of background of infrastructure of vision and goals, assessments, training, change management, preparing people in teams and with partners to do Lean, and all that stuff that just underlies a very large project that's going to be resource and time consuming. within the lean principles themselves, they start with waste removal in general, Kaizen events, 5S workflows organization comes next. Those could be flipped around. Setup reduction, creating standard work, mistake proofing, and then finally, way down the road, we get to the point where we can do flow. So the idea we're talking about is to take that pyramid and flip it over and stand it on a stand and do it in the reverse order, doing flow first, and then using flow to allow us to do the other things. So this is only a 2-level model instead of a multi-level pyramid, because once we establish flow, and we don't want to layer on one lean technique at a time like the traditional pyramid did. Instead, we want to use flow to identify the rate limiting factor. Once we know what the rate limiting factor is, then we can use the appropriate lean tool, whatever it may be, to go after that rate limiting factor. So sometimes it would be a Kaizen event, sometimes it would be 5S, sometimes it would be setup reduction. Whatever the impediment is, then we can pick the proper tool to go after it. So it's a much simpler pyramid, all based on the idea of starting with flow instead of doing flow at the last step. To do that, we needed some technical breakthroughs that weren't available years ago that would enable us to do this kind of flow first model. And the key technological breakthrough we needed was the virtual Kanban board. Now, Kanban boards have existed for years in lean manufacturing organizations and other lean environments. But the virtual Kanban board, where it's on the internet or online and available to anybody, anywhere, to follow, is actually a development from the Agile software development world. And so what I wanted to do was borrow the tool back from the Agile world and repurpose it for non-manufacturing lean. And so I looked at many, many different Kanban board tools that were available in the IT world. And it was SwiftKanban that really stood out as a powerful and flexible tool that would allow us to repurpose it for uses other than software development. And so that's why we landed on Swift and developed this wonderful relationship, was really because of the power of this tool and its ability to work in non-IT development environments. So here's a typical, very, very simplified idea of how a Kanban board works. We start with the upstream input. Typically, if we're doing the whole value stream, that upstream input would be the customer input. And then we follow the input through process steps until the process is complete, and then we can deliver the value either downstream or deliver the value back to the customer if we have the whole value stream in place. And that's our intention. And if we can, we want to do an entire value stream at a time using this approach. So it's very simple just to follow the cards across the board and keep track of our work. And also we're able, and I'll show you in a few minutes how to do this, we're able to implement the pull system and limit the amount of work in process in our flow by using a board like this. Notice that these cards on the board can have a symbolic relationship to the physical flow in the organization, but we can still have a relatively messy physical flow, but be able to show, represent that flow visually in a very well-organized way using a virtual Kanban board that people anywhere in our organization in any time zone and in any location can follow and participate in. So to do this, we need a series of a few simple steps in order to create this kind of environment in a non-manufacturing organization. We start by getting a grasp of the lean principles that we would want to use to get started. Pick a single value stream and map the processes in that value stream. Build our flow on the Kanban board, and then establish the Q limits and principles for pull to use the Kanban board as a management tool. Implement pull and manage the flow on a daily basis, and then use the flow to identify, pinpoint, and eliminate waste, and thereby streamline and improve the flow. So I'll take you through this very quickly. So first, understand the lean principles. In the traditional manufacturing model, many organizations feel like they need to train everybody in the organization in depth for weeks or several weeks in lean principles, do field trips, preferably to Japan, to see how other people are implementing lean, and then bring that awareness back to the organization. What we try to do is accomplish the same thing in a day. Starting with a conference room simulation that's fast and effective, and in my opinion gets the aha effect that we need much quicker than doing classroom training. So we actually do a simulation of a non-manufacturing process. Here's a group going through the simulation of their conference room. You can see a photo inset there of their tracking board, where they're keeping track of the results as they go through the 4 phases of this simulation game, and trying to get a feel of what the difference is between the way they traditionally delivered a value in their organization and what it would look like if it was delivered on a lean flow basis. I'll just show you phase 1 and phase 4, so I left out phase 2 and 3, but you can see the difference between phase 1, which is kind of a representation of their existing approach, to phase 4, which is kind of a radical lean with flow with not very much work in process. And you can see that there's almost a 10-fold improvement on many of these measures. So we can deliver a value in about 1/10 as much time. It takes half as much actual work time on task to do the work. We can run with much less work in process. The productivity time per file, you can see, is more than 3 times higher using the lean approach, and on and on and on. So, and I love the last line there, which is effort. So the effort to deliver worse results was very high. And yet when we get to the point in phase 4 where we're delivering extraordinary results, the people in the simulation are also reporting that the effort is extremely low in order to do that. So we've made the work much easier to do and improved the performance dramatically. This isn't unusual. Other lean approaches do this too, but we're trying to demonstrate how we can do this very rapidly instead of taking years to achieve those phase 4 results. And then part of it is we spend the morning in the simulation, and the afternoon is really about how do we map the ideas in the simulation to our actual processes that we're using in our organization. Sometimes it's fairly simple. I remember working with a bank loan processing department, and the president of the bank was in the room participating in the simulation. When we got to the debrief period, he just said, "Let's just do this. It's exactly like our process. We can start doing this immediately." And in fact, we did. We changed the loan process for the bank based on the simulation. Other organizations have a more challenging time mapping it into their organization and have to think more metaphorically about how it would work in their organization. So we try to first create the aha awareness and then map that awareness into how it would work in the organization that we're working with. Second step is to pick a value stream and map it. Now we know kind of how it works. The question is, which value stream do we want to work in? We certainly don't want to work everywhere at the same time as we would in the traditional definition of lean, where everybody works in attacking waste in all forms. In this approach, we want to focus in on a particular value stream. And then we use right now we're using the traditional kind of tools to map that value stream. Some of you who are familiar with lean will recognize this value stream map. We think we can make a better one. We just haven't spent the time yet to build a better one. But there's some important features here that I think are worth pointing out. One thing is, you'll notice that the processes are lined up kind of in the middle of the diagram with customer input on one end and delivering value on the other end. And at the bottom of the chart, we have a timeline. That little sawtooth chart actually shows how much time it takes, both time on task and also time waiting in someone's in-basket to be worked on to get a work piece all the way through the process. So we map the flow going left to right and keep track of how much time to each step. And a lot of the time represents non-value added time, and that'll be one of the things we'll be interested in going after. Now, the traditional approach would stop here with the value stream map and then spend months or years decomposing this value stream map into where the waste is, and then using Kaizen events to attack the waste based on the analysis of this map. We don't want to do that. We want use the map to identify the processes, but we're going to use actual flow, not value stream map, to identify what waste needs to be removed, and that'll be much more effective for non-manufacturing organizations. And I just want to point out that creating visible flow in a non-manufacturing organization has unique challenges that we don't see in factory environments. Here's a government client of mine. I need permission to use these photographs, but you can see personalized and quite messy workplaces in non-manufacturing environments, and these people will not be amenable to having us simply go in and make manufacturing cell type environments out of their personalized work areas. So these work areas have multiple work pieces, many files, many kinds of work. These people typically work in many value streams at the same time, so it isn't all work of the value stream we need to be working on. It's messy. We have trouble finding the work pieces. We don't know how much work in process typically is in the flow when we start. We don't know how big the backlog is of unstarted work. We don't know what work is blocked and what work is not blocked. If someone called, God help us, and asked us for the status of their work, we'd have a difficult time finding it and then telling them how much longer it would take before they would get the response that they were looking for. So it's very difficult environment compared to manufacturing environments where we have tangible work pieces and physical flow. We also oftentimes have office environments with cubicles, difficult to rearrange into any kind of co-located cellular type approach. Oftentimes employees are not in the office, maybe not even in the same city. So we have the photograph on the bottom of the employee out in the field doing the field work, who still needs to be plugged into the flow, even though he's not in the office doing work there. And again, a picture of how complicated, how many files are open at one time, and how difficult it is to understand the state of the file. So we could attack this, and we could decide, okay, we're going to clean up all of these workplaces. We're going to get rid of personalized workspaces. We're going to create, physical co-located flow like we did in the factory. But my belief now is that's simply a waste of time, and it's buying into precepts of manufacturing that we don't have to buy into. So we can build a virtual flow instead and set cue limits without having to directly attack the physical environment of the non-manufacturing organization. If we can do that, we can get the flow immediately, start getting bottom line results, and then we can start cleaning up the physical environment over time as we understand where the rate limiting factors are. The way we do that is take that value stream map that we built in the last stage, and we map it into the virtual Kanban board, like the SwiftKanban product. And so we take the actual processes that we think we should track. We map them into the columns on the Kanban board, and then we will have a Kanban board that looks like this, where we can visualize and manage the flow across the board. This is a government agency, and part of their board. It's not the entire board. They had 18 steps. They were monitoring across this process, and it's actually handling complaints for illegal dumping and rodent infestations. So they call themselves the Rats and Garbage Department, and it's an important part of county government. And you can see that the work flows from left to right through these columns. And the top represents the entire value stream, and then each column is a process. And then each card in each column is a piece of work. So it's a work piece card that represents physical work or work on a computer system, possibly somewhere else in the organization. But we can show it all here at in the same place on the Kanban board. Again, we have left to right flow. The top of the board is the working area. Those cards are actually in process and being worked on by someone, so they would likely the physical work that likely on someone's desk. The middle area is called the ready to pull area, and that indicates that those work pieces are done and they're waiting to be pulled into the next column. But we don't push them into the next column using the pull logic. We wait until the person or the people in the next column have the capacity to draw those cards, pull those cards into the next working area. Some cards are blocked. The cards with the red circle around them are blocked, meaning that there's something about that card that keeps it from moving to the next department or being complete. It could be waiting for a response from the complainant or something like that. So in that case, this is where supervision should keep an eye on those exception conditions and be ready to support the organization. So the Scoreboard itself is largely self-managing, doesn't require supervisory intervention, but these exception conditions are where supervisors would focus their attention. Here, the Kanban limit in the column has been exceeded by 1 card, and so this is an error condition or a exception condition that again should attract the attention of supervision. The person with the bag over their head is making the point that using flow first, we're not going to have a really pretty flow when we start because we haven't used workplace reorganization and waste reduction to create this beautiful flow. Instead, we start with the flow that we have. And what we need basically is minimum viable flow. We may have to do enough work so we actually have a flow. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to allow us to represent it on the Kanban board. So we start with an ugly flow instead of a pretty flow, and then we make a beautiful flow over time by using the flow itself as our main tool for improvement. Implementing the pull system and managing flow is the next piece of work, and we can actually do this like for organizations that do this intensively. This would be like the 4th day of their implementation. So we use pull to manage the flow and keep the backlog from building over time without us realizing that it's happening. So at the top of this column, you can see that we have a maximum of 15 in that column. And right now we have 5 cards representing work in the organization that are in the column, which is writing the complaint letter or closing the complaint. So if we have capacity, because we're less than 15, to draw more work into that column. So somebody working in that column can go over to their previous column and into the ready to pull area and say, okay, I can take that case 81 and I can pull it over to my column and start working on it. I don't have to ask anybody's permission. Nobody assigned the work to me. I simply go find the next piece of work and draw it into my column. And I can do that as long as there's less than 15 items in my column. When I finish a piece, I simply move it down into the ready to pull area, and whoever is working in the next column can draw that card now into their column to pull it into their column and begin working on it as well. If these limits are hit, then the column gets clogged. That should raise a kind of a crisis, a mini crisis in the organization where it attracts the attention of supervision to clear the blockage. If it's not cleared, then it'll start backing upstream and clogging another column. So this is meant to be self-limiting by creating these little crises that are much, much better than finding out after months of work that we have a huge backlog that would take a long, long time to work off, and all our customers are very unhappy with our ability to respond. The other cool thing that the SwiftKanban product allows us to do, this is a very important principle of Lean, is instead of allowing all the work to be in work in process at once, we want to hold the work that we can't yet start at the beginning of the process in a backlog situation. So we actually can use the backlog tool provided by SwiftKanban to hold our backlog in front. And then this is a supervisory responsibility to release the work to the Kanban board into work in process, if you like, as capacity is available. So our customer begins the process, or our upstream provider, by giving us work. The work would go into the backlog unless the board had immediate capacity. That backlog would be assigned to the board in the ready column to begin the new flow. And then as the work is completed, we would deliver that work to our downstream user or our end customer. So that's how the backlog and the Kanban board work together. So what do managers or supervisors do in this situation? Their work changes quite a bit from the traditional firefighting model that most frontline supervisors and managers do in organizations. First thing, of course, is releasing the backlog to the board. That's one of the primary things, is keeping track of the balance of the board, the capacity of the board, and releasing backlog to make sure that there's, a variety of work on the board that can be processed. Establish work in process limits, queue limits, part of the pull system. So every column should have a limit on it. It says how much work will allow to be in that column. And setting those limits, excuse me, can be it's kind of a trial and error process based on the variation in process times between the two columns. And usually we set that and then make some adjustments. And then once we get it and make the initial adjustments, then we use process improvement to allow us to keep reducing those limits. The supervisor can assist when the limits are exceeded. Support improvement projects. A very important part of this is improving the flow, because remember, we started with minimum viable flow. That's not good enough going forward. It's just good enough to get us started. So those improvement projects are what allow us to improve the flow, continue to reduce the kanban limits over time. Help the team get what it needs to do its work on a self-managed basis. So carry water for the team, typical supervisory responsibility. Rebalance the flow as it's improved. You might need to put more people in some areas than we had initially. So rebalance the flow is an important part of that, and keeping track of the metrics to make sure that we're actually making improvements to the process and also meeting our customer expectations in the value stream. Typical responsibilities of the supervisor or manager in the lean environment. The last step is basically to eliminate the waste itself and streamline the flow. So again, instead of using broad-based Kaizen events and other waste reduction techniques, we're going to use the flow itself to identify the rate limiting factors, the bottlenecks, and then attack those because they're high leverage and they will drop results to the bottom line, and use those to create improvement. Using the traditional plan, do, check, act, or if you prefer, plan, do, study, act improvement cycle that's been so well proven in Lean, it's still very effective in this model. And so we should always have teams that are come from operations who are improving their own processes and having some control over their processes. By the way, that control and the ability to improve your processes has a lot to do with employee engagement around implementing Lean in the organization. One of the really cool things about having access to the Kanban boards is that we can not only use it to track our flow, we can also use it in the form of a Agile project tool to track the improvement project. So here we're using the same technology, but in a different way now, to keep track of the improvement projects we have for a particular value stream. So we have each card now represents an improvement project, how to work these flowing to our customer, and then we have plan, do, check, act, PDCA, and when we're done, we can recommend the idea for implementation, and if it's approved, this is a tested idea, so we just simply have to verify that the results are what we want. If that's approved, we'll do this again, then we're ready to streamline the flow. So remember, we had this letter close column that we looked at earlier with a limit of 15, but if we made improvements in that area, then those improvements will affect that maximum limit of 15. So now we can maybe reduce it from 15 to 10. It reduces the total amount of work and process in our flow and reduces the time it takes to respond to a customer requirement and our throughput time. So that's how we make improvements to the flows, through identifying the rate limiting factors, eliminating those rate limiting factors, and then lowering the Kanban limits. That's the engine that creates improvement going forward. So these are the 5 simple steps, and so the question I like to ask organizations is, will they work for your organization? Is this simple enough now and straightforward enough and fast enough that you'd be willing to do this in your organization? Many organizations have said they wouldn't consider the traditional manufacturing model to Lean, now can see a path forward where they could do Lean using a simple process like this. And at that point, well, it's worth mentioning that we call this LeanNow. We had to put a name on it so we could talk to other people about it. And it's basically this rapid approach of going from 0 to Lean in less than 30 days while achieving remarkable customer results and bottom line results in less than 60 days, and then having a model of continuous improvement from that point forward to refine and improve and applying more lean practices going forward. So LeanNow, to summarize, is the idea of flow first. It's the idea of using a new technology, virtual Kanban boards, and using those boards to track flow that may not actually be physically tangible or visible in our organization, and using that tracking of flow to target the waste in the flow, remove that waste, tighten the flow, and then using that tight flow to create those awesome outcomes that we always want from lean implementations. And being able to do this again in 30 days to be managing with lean, and 60 days to be seeing bottom line results. At that point, it might be worth opening this up with some questions and comments.
Randall, thanks for an invigorating talk, and as usual, a lot of great concepts presented there, and a lot of questions that have come in here. So let's go ahead and take some of them, and I'm going to try and summarize because some of them are in a way repeated. So even though we've been talking about it for most of the last 40 minutes, I think probably what might help is to have a very concise explanation of how the LeanNow approach is different from other approaches. That's been the question that a few people have asked. So how is it different from the other lean approaches?
Well, the other approaches are generally based on the traditional manufacturing model. And the traditional manufacturing model needed to remove a lot of waste and do a lot of workplace reorganization and co-location before flow could be created. And so what we tried to do here is flip that on its head and say in service organizations, we don't have to remove physical obstacles to flow for the most part. We can create a virtual flow almost immediately and begin managing with that flow. The other thing is that service organizations have their own unique problems that manufacturing organizations don't have, like personalized work areas, like virtual intangible work pieces, people not working in a co-located model or even in the same building or even in the same country that still have to be part of the flow. So we also wanted to accommodate those important unique characteristics of non-manufacturing, as well as stop doing the things that manufacturing companies have to do that we don't have to do in service organizations. So that's the main difference as I see it.
Okay. One of the things that you said earlier was, and this question that's coming is, why do you consider endless waste removal a problem?
Because I remember a conversation we used to have a lot in my manufacturing consulting days, which is, if an organization simply did endless waste removal, would they end up with lean? And the answer is no, they wouldn't. Waste removal itself is not actually the definition of lean. We misdefined lean, and it leads us to believe that waste reduction is the ultimate goal of lean. But the ultimate goal of lean is to create a flow of an uninterrupted flow of value to the end user with no waste. And so waste reduction is actually in service to flow. It's not the ultimate goal. So if we get stuck in waste reduction loops and do that, for year after year, we actually never get to the primary purpose of lean. And to do lean requires additional tools beyond simple waste reduction in order to achieve that. So while waste reduction is good, pinpointed and focused waste reduction on high leverage waste is even better in terms of creating flow quickly.
Right. Somewhat of an implementation related question. What is the minimum number of people needed to benefit from a flow with 3 different process columns?
1. The answer is 1. I use Kanban boards personally myself. I'm the only person that uses them, and I keep track of a lot of the work in my consulting firm using what's often called personal Kanban boards. But basically, I keep my own lean flow. I have limits on the columns, and I discipline myself not to start too many projects at one time or too many activities. So I think 1's the answer, and from 1 you can go up pretty much as high as you like. Many of the organizations I work with have, like I just worked with a high-tech company who had about 60 people working in one flow and one Kanban board at the same time.
Right. Another sort of common theme across a few questions is, how is this different from Agile? Is this similar to Agile?
Yes, it is. In fact, it's very confusing because the tool itself looks almost identical to the tool that you would use in Agile. But there are some really key differences. Agile is a project tool where this is a flow tool. So in Agile, we usually don't have very many work in process columns. It's kind of like ready, doing, done is the standard Agile Kanban board model. We may take the doing and break it down into doing, testing, approved, or something like that. But it's not like the flow model where like in the government agency model I was showing on the screen, there was actually 18 columns for work in process. So we're looking at a recurring flow, and we can track that in more detail because the same steps happen over and over again in recurring flow. The other difference is the way that work gets onto the board. In an Agile model, we usually use a Scrum approach where we have the backlog board is a week's release of work to the board, and then you have a burn down approach where we try to burn down that work over the week, and then we repopulate the board the next week from the Scrum backlog. And then before the Scrum backlog, there's usually a gestation backlog where we're actually taking ideas for new features or bug fixes or things like that, and like organize them into releases. So there's a two-step backlog process. In the flow model, the backlog represents work that's coming directly from our upstream customer or from our external customer. And it can go on. It's a continuous model where that work can be released continuously to the board. Now, some IT development, like I have a client who uses a continuous model instead of an Agile model for IT development, and they use actually the LeanNow approach to release work to their IT department on a continuous model instead of using the weekly Scrum approach. But those are the key differences. The tool looks a lot the same, but the daily management of the flow, because it's a recurring flow, is quite a bit different.
Right. There's a lot of questions, and I'm afraid there may not be enough time. Maybe we'll go a couple of minutes over. There's another question about how do you start the process of modeling the flow? How do you determine the start and end of the value stream which you want to model? For example, consider a situation where customer enforces analysis and acceptance of the batch of all of the work up front, and then accepting and deploying it at the end of the batch as well. So how do you decide the start and end of a particular flow that you want to analyze?
Well, there's the ideal way, and then there's the real world way. The ideal way is start with the customer and end with the customer essentially, and usually our input in non-manufacturing environments is a customer requirement. So we'd like to go, customer to customer, or sometimes it's called wall to wall with the flow to define the value stream. In actual fact, lots of times we can't quite get the whole value stream, in the room at the same time, and so we take parts of that value stream as much as we can grab. So it's a judgment call. What we want to do is manage as much of it as we can, and also try to pick it up at a place where we can have backlog. So we don't want to start the lean flow in the middle of a value stream. We like to start at some breakpoint, and the obvious breakpoint is when the customer requirement arrives, but also it could be when one department gives work to another department. That's less attractive, but it's still doable. So I can't give a definite answer, but we want as much of the customer to customer end to end processes so we can get.
Okay, and I guess that's sort of accounts for some of the other questions where people look at large Kanban boards and worry if very wide boards are overwhelming and daunting for people to be able to handle.
Yes, they can be overwhelming. One of the things that we can do with the SwiftKanban board that we couldn't do with others is to put the ready to pull status underneath instead of beside. So the typical Kanban board had the ready to pull as a different column, and so that made the board twice as wide again. I think, you know, my clients that have used up to 18 columns have done fine. Lots of my clients use more like 10 or 12 columns to do it, and find that it's manageable. Certainly more manageable than anything they could do physically in their operation. But yeah, it means that instead of having one 60-inch monitor on the wall, if we're going to display this on the wall, we maybe need two side by side in order to get the entire Kanban board in at one time. It also means that most people, of course, are looking at the Kanban board on their own computers virtually and can filter the parts that they want to see and the work that they want to look at using the filtering tools in SwiftKanban. So many people don't actually look at the entire board at one time in order to do their work. But it's the best alternative we know of at this time. I should probably mention too that one of the really cool things that some organizations could take advantage of with SwiftKanban is that there's actually boards above boards. So we can summarize the work at one level of the board and actually make a higher level board above it that's looking at less detail than like the 18-column detail board. So we could maybe have 3 columns or 4 columns at a more abstracted board, and maybe managers or executives are looking at that board rather than looking at the fine high-resolution detail in that 18-column board. So that's a feature that organizations can use as well, which is rather unique to SwiftKanban.
Absolutely, Randall, you kind of stole my thunder there. I was going to say exactly that. There are a couple of questions that have come up on SwiftKanban, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly answer them. We are out of time, so we will take the rest of the questions offline and you know, get to each of you who have asked these questions. So first of all, SwiftKanban is available both as a SaaS software service. You can just sign up online for a free trial, and you have the URLs in front of you that you can go to, and also available for an on-site, on-premise install if you wanted to install it in-house. The second thing is that SwiftKanban does integrate with Jira and other ticket management systems and a bunch of other systems. You can get all the details on our website as well. And secondly, a number of you asked us, we will provide a copy of the slides as well as the recording of the webinar to you in a follow-up email in a couple of days. With that, I'd like to close the webinar here. Randall, thank you so much for a very informative and very interesting talk as usual. And thanks to all of the great audience who stayed through the webinar and asked some great questions at the end. Once again, we will get back to you with answers to some of the questions that you asked.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone in the audience. It's been a pleasure to be with you all today.
Thanks, and have a great day. Bye-bye.